My name is Myra Kessler, and I'm 32 years old. I still remember the exact shade of blue I was wearing that night, a deep navy dress I had bought 3 weeks before, thinking it was elegant enough for a formal party, but not so flashy that it would overshadow the woman of the hour. I had spent 40 minutes on my hair. I had rehearsed small talk in the mirror. I had told myself, just get through tonight, Myra. Just smile and get through it. It was Mother's Day evening, and my mother-in-law, Sylvia Hargrove, had arranged a dinner gathering at the Hargrove estate, a sprawling property outside the city that her late husband had built from inherited money and careful investments. Over 600 guests had been invited. Business partners, distant relatives, old family friends, local politicians. The kind of crowd where every handshake is a transaction and every smile hides an agenda. I had attended these events for 4 years, ever since I married her son, Conrad Hargrove. For years of standing at the edge of conversations I was never quite invited into. For years of laughing at jokes I didn't find funny. For years of pretending not to notice when Sylvia looked through me like I was made of glass. But that night was different. That night, Sylvia decided she was done being subtle. It started at the dinner table. We were barely through the appetizers when she made her first comment, something about how the centerpiece arrangements looked rushed, then glancing directly at me, since I had offered to coordinate the florals as a gesture of goodwill. I said nothing. I picked up my fork and looked at my plate. Conrad sat beside me and said nothing either. The table moved on. Then came the second comment, during the main course. She was speaking to the wife of a senator seated across from us, describing how she had always imagined Conrad settling down with someone rooted in this world, someone who understood legacy and standing, and what it meant to carry a family name with dignity. She didn't use my name. She didn't have to. Every eye at that end of the table drifted toward me for exactly 1 second before darting away. I felt my face go warm. I felt Conrad shift slightly in his chair. He reached for his wine glass. Still, I said nothing. It was the third comment that broke something open inside me. We had moved into the main hall for dessert and mingling, and Sylvia was holding court near the fireplace, surrounded by a cluster of older women I recognized from previous events. I was passing by when I heard her voice rise just enough to carry. She was talking about her son's career, his achievements, the Hargrove name. And then she said, with a particular kind of gentleness that is somehow sharper than cruelty, that the only thing missing from Conrad's life was a wife who actually belonged beside him. I stopped walking. I turned around. And for the first time in 4 years, I spoke back. I didn't shout. I didn't make a scene, not yet, not intentionally. I simply walked to where she stood and, in a calm and steady voice that surprised even me, I said that I had spent 4 years trying to belong in this family, and perhaps the problem was never about belonging at all. The room didn't go silent immediately. It took a few seconds, the way a wave takes a moment to reach the shore after the stone has already dropped. And in those few seconds, before anyone could react, before Sylvia could form a response, Conrad appeared at my side. I felt it before I understood what had happened. The sound reached the far corners of that hall. 600 people. Crystal glasses midair. Conversations cut clean in half. A slap, open-handed, sharp, undeniable, delivered by my husband, in front of everyone his family had ever wanted to impress. The room went completely still. I stood there with my hand raised slowly to my cheek, not from pain, though the pain was real, but from something much deeper than pain. From the specific, hollow shock of realizing that the person who was supposed to choose you chose his mother's comfort over your dignity, in public, without hesitation. I did not cry in that hall. I turned, walked through the grand double doors, stepped onto the stone pathway outside, pulled out my phone, and called the only person I knew would come without asking a single question first. "Mom," I said, when she picked up. "Please come." She arrived in 53 minutes. I know because I counted. I sat on the stone steps outside the Hargrove estate, in my navy dress, with the night air cold against my face, and I counted every minute. Not because I was impatient, but because counting gave me something to hold on to while everything else inside me was quietly coming apart. My mother, Rosalind Kessler, was 61 years old. She was a woman who had raised me alone after my father passed when I was 9. She had worked 2 jobs through most of my teenage years, had never once complained in front of me, and had built a quiet kind of strength that didn't announce itself. It simply existed, the way a foundation exists beneath a house. You don't notice it until something tries to bring the walls down. She pulled up in her silver car, stepped out without rushing, looked at my face once, and then sat down beside me on those cold stone steps in her good coat. She didn't ask what happened. She already knew from my voice on the phone, the way a mother always knows. She put her arm around me, and I finally let myself cry. Not the dramatic, gasping kind. The quiet kind. The kind that comes when you have been holding something too heavy for too long and someone finally takes part of the weight. After a few minutes, she asked me one question. Not "Are you okay?" Not "What did he do?" She asked, "Do you want this to be over?" I looked at her. I said yes. She nodded once. The way she always did when a decision had been made and there was nothing left to do but move forward. Then she stood up, smoothed her coat, and walked through those grand double doors like she had been invited. I followed her. The party had not resumed its natural rhythm. The guests were still caught in that particular discomfort that follows a public scene, conversations restarted but hollow, laughter too careful, eyes moving toward doors and exits. Conrad was near the bar, speaking in low tones with his brother. Sylvia was back near the fireplace, composed again, performing composure the way she always did. And my mother walked directly toward her. I stayed close enough to hear everything. Rosalind Kessler did not raise her voice. She did not make a speech. She stood in front of Sylvia Hargrove, this woman with her estate and her 600 guests and her family legacy, and she spoke quietly enough that only the immediate circle could hear. But what she said traveled across that room the way truth always travels, faster than sound, carried by the expressions of everyone who witnessed it. She told Sylvia that she had watched her daughter spend 4 years trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided she didn't deserve one. She told her that a woman who raises a son to strike his wife in public has not built a legacy, she has built a lie. And she told her that the Hargrove name, whatever weight it carried in this room, would not be Myra's burden to carry any longer. Then she turned to Conrad. Conrad, who had not moved from his spot near the bar. Conrad, who had watched his mother-in-law walk in and still had not crossed the room to find me, to apologize, to do anything at all. My mother looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at something you once thought was valuable and have now correctly assessed. She said, simply and without drama, that she hoped he understood what he had lost tonight and that no apology he ever offered would be sufficient, because a man who chooses a moment like that reveals exactly who he is, and who he is was not worthy of her daughter. The room was silent again. Different from before. Before, the silence had been shocked. This silence was the kind that follows accountability, heavier, more honest, impossible to fill with small talk. Sylvia said nothing. For the first time in 4 years, she had absolutely nothing to say. I filed for divorce the following Monday morning. My attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Serena Voss, who came highly recommended and delivered on every bit of it, had the papers drawn and delivered within the week. Conrad did not contest it, not meaningfully. I think somewhere beneath the pride and the conditioning and the years of being his mother's favorite son, even he knew. He had made his choice in front of 600 witnesses, and that choice had consequences he couldn't charm or inherit his way out of. What came next surprised even me. Several of the guests who had been present that night, business associates, people who had long-standing financial relationships with the Hargrove family, began quietly withdrawing. Not dramatically. Not publicly. But a partnership here, a contract there. The kind of reputational erosion that doesn't make headlines but hollows out an empire from the inside. Conrad's brother called me 2 months later, not to apologize but to ask, with barely concealed panic, what I intended to say publicly. I told him I intended to say nothing. I didn't need to. Truth, once witnessed by 600 people, has its own momentum. Sylvia Hargrove's grand annual Mother's Day gathering, the one she had hosted every year for 2 decades, the centerpiece of her social calendar, was not held the following year. No formal announcement. No explanation. It simply didn't happen. The estate was quieter. The invitations didn't go out. The Hargrove name, which she had spent a lifetime polishing, had developed a scratch that no amount of entertaining could buff away. My mother never spoke about that night as though she had done something heroic. When I thanked her, weeks later over tea in her kitchen, she looked genuinely puzzled by the gratitude. She said she had simply told the truth to people who needed to hear it, and that the only remarkable thing about the evening was that it had taken this long for someone to say it out loud. I moved into a small apartment that spring. It had big windows and belonged entirely to me. I planted something on the balcony, a single pot of lavender, because it was hardy and it smelled like something new. I woke up on the first morning in that apartment and lay still for a while, listening to the quiet, and realized that for the first time in 4 years, nothing in me was braced for impact. I was Myra Kessler. I was 32 years old. And I was, finally, entirely free.